I am Isabella Hayes, and this is my story, the story of a stolen childhood, a ruined family, and a 10-year wait for justice. By the time the truth comes out, no one who betrayed me will ever stand the same way again. The night air smelled of rain and fear. I ran through the empty streets of Chicago, my heart pounding with a confusion I could not explain. My father, my protector, my hero was gone, and the police kept saying I was responsible. But I knew the truth, even if I could not prove it. Who would betray the most powerful man in our family? Who would smile while the world blamed me? And why did the people I trusted the most vanish when I needed them? I was 18 the night my life fell apart, though I did not know it then. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, in a mansion that overlooked Lake Michigan. People admired my father, Gregor Hayes, for building a business empire from nothing. He was strong, ambitious, and fiercely protective of our family. My mother, Catherine Hayes, 43, was always graceful, dressed perfectly, and concerned with the family's image. Sometimes I wondered if appearances mattered more to her than love. My uncle Marcus Hayes, 48, had a charm that made people trust him instantly. But there was something in his eyes, a cold calculation I could never put my finger on. And then there was my cousin, Nathan Hayes, 22, spoiled, cunning, ambitious. He thrived on attention and power. I had never seen him truly care for anyone outside his ambitions. I had grown up trusting these people, thinking our family was unbreakable. But that night, nothing would ever be the same. It was late in the evening when I returned from Northwestern University's library, my backpack heavy with books. The streets of Chicago were quiet, the city lights reflecting off the lake in the distance. As I entered our mansion on Lakeshore Drive, the air felt thick, almost suffocating. The grand halls were silent. Too silent. "Dad?" I called out, my voice trembling. Normally, the house buzzed with my father's booming laugh or my mother's soft guidance. Tonight, only shadows seemed to move. I walked toward the study upstairs, the polished wood of the banister cold under my hands. Then I saw the door ajar, light spilling into the hallway like a warning. I pushed it open slowly, and a sigh stole my breath. My father, Gregor Hayes, lay motionless on the floor. Blood had soaked his crisp white shirt, spreading across the Persian rug beneath him. His eyes stared at the ceiling, empty and unseeing. "No, Dad," I cried, my knees threatening to buckle. I ran to him, shaking his shoulders. He did not move. My stomach twisted, panic overtaking me. Catherine appeared behind me, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Isabella, call the police," she whispered. Her voice sounded distant, almost detached. Was she frightened, or was there something she was hiding? I looked around the room. Papers were scattered, a vase tilted but not broken. Everything seemed staged, as if someone had tried to create the perfect illusion of chaos. Could it have been a stranger? A robber? Or could someone close to us have done this? My mind raced with questions I could not answer. Why would anyone want to hurt my father? Who could be capable of something so cruel? Was someone I trusted standing right there, smiling behind a mask? I did not know then that my uncle Marcus and cousin, Nathan, had been closer to this crime than I could ever imagine. All I knew was fear, confusion, and a sinking feeling that my life would never be the same. That night, evidence seemed to shift before my eyes, stories twisted, and by the end of the night, I, Isabella Hayes, was accused of a crime I did not commit. My father was gone. My family's empire was slipping through my fingers, and I had no idea who I could trust. That night, as I sat in the cold shadows of my bedroom, staring at the city lights over Lake Michigan, I promised myself one thing: one day, I would uncover the truth. And when I did, everyone responsible would pay. The police arrived quickly, their sirens cutting through the quiet Chicago night. I could barely speak, my lips trembling, my hands shaking as they asked for my statement. I found him like this. My father, I stammered, but every word felt hollow. My father was gone, and I could not make sense of the world. I remember one officer looking at me with suspicion rather than concern. "Miss Hayes, do you understand the gravity of this situation?" he asked. Did he think I could do such a thing? Could I have imagined it? My own mind was spinning, questioning everything I had ever known. Marcus and Nathan appeared shortly after. Uncle Marcus's face was calm, collected, almost too calm, and Nathan looked pained, like a grieving cousin, but his eyes darted too quickly, scanning the room, calculating. Could grief look so perfect? Or was it a performance? At that moment, I began to realize something terrifying. Sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones capable of the most harm. But how could I ever prove it? Who would believe an 18-year-old girl against a family as powerful as mine? The next few days were a blur of flashing lights, hushed whispers, and endless questions. Friends stopped calling. The city that had admired my family suddenly whispered behind closed doors. Newspapers plastered my face across front pages with headlines that accused me of murder. Heiress accused of father's death, read one. Chicago teen behind tycoon's murder? Read another. The trial was even worse. The courtroom in downtown Chicago felt like a theater of cruelty. Every word, every glance seemed designed to crush me. Prosecutors painted me as cold, unfeeling, capable of killing my own father for greed. The witnesses twisted stories, and every time I tried to explain myself, the words felt useless, like shouting into a storm. I could feel my father's absence everywhere in the silence of our mansion, in my mother's distant eyes, in Marcus's smirk when he thought no one was looking. And Nathan. He watched me in the courtroom with a curious intensity that made my stomach churn. Was it concern? Or was it anticipation? When the gavel finally fell, I felt the world tilt. Guilty. 10 years. I was sent away to a prison far from Chicago, far from the life I had known. My father's business empire was seized. My mother. I do not know where she went after the trial. And Marcus and Nathan? They walked free, smiling, untouched. As I sat in the prison transport, the city lights fading behind me, I made a vow. I would survive. I would learn. I would come back stronger than anyone could imagine. And one day, I would return to the world that had destroyed my family and claim justice, not with anger, not with violence, but with intelligence, patience, and precision. Even now, I could not know who would pay first. Was it Marcus, with his icy charm hiding a ruthless mind? Or Nathan, with his calculating, arrogant gaze? Or perhaps someone else I had not yet suspected? One thing was certain. I would uncover every secret, every betrayal, every lie. And when I did, the world would remember the name Isabella Hayes. Prison was nothing like I imagined. I thought the worst part would be the loss of freedom, but it was the silence, the watchful eyes, and the constant sense of danger that crushed me. I had always been strong in my own world, surrounded by luxury, love, and power, but this place stripped all of that away. The first day, I was led through the iron gates of the correctional facility on the outskirts of Joliet, Illinois. The walls were tall, gray, unyielding, and the air smelled of cold concrete and fear. Women passed me in the halls, some hardened by years of survival, some frightened like me. I wondered immediately, who here could help me, and who would try to break me? The guards' eyes were sharp, their instructions final. "Follow the rules, or you will regret it," one said casually. I swallowed my fear, reminding myself, I am not here to cry, I am here to survive. But a nagging question ran through my mind. How could I survive when I did not even know who my real enemies were? Was Marcus and Nathan already planning their next move while I sat here? Would anyone believe my story if I ever had a chance to speak again? I was assigned to a small cell on the second floor. The walls were bare, the bed hard, the air thick. And yet, I began to notice the little things. The way other prisoners whispered to each other. How alliances formed quietly. How power existed even here, far from Chicago's skyscrapers and business empires. It was on the second day that I met her, Claire, a woman in her late 30s who had been in prison for over a decade. She seemed calm, but there was a sharp intelligence behind her eyes. "New girl, huh?" she asked, her voice low. "You look like someone who does not belong here." I nodded, unsure what to say. Could I trust her? Or was she already sizing me up as prey? Over the next few weeks, I observed. I learned. I listened to stories, gathered information, and quietly started planning. I had nothing but time, and in this place time was a weapon. Each interaction, each small victory, each moment of survival became part of a larger plan. I barely understood myself yet. Sometimes at night, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about my father's murder, my mother's silence, and the courtroom that has sentenced me. My thoughts were sharp, restless, and full of questions. Prison was not just punishment, it was training. Each day tested my patience, my courage, and my mind. I began to understand that revenge would not come from brute force or anger. It would come from patience, intelligence, and waiting for the right moment to strike. And I promised myself, quietly in the darkness, when I walked out of these walls, I would return to the world that had destroyed my family. I would take down Marcus, Nathan, and anyone who had played a part in my father's death. One by one. For now, I survived. But survival was only the beginning. Prison taught me lessons no classroom ever could. Every day was a test of patience, observation, and control. At first, I thought my youth and innocence would make me weak here. But soon I realized that being underestimated was an advantage. People saw me as fragile, scared, and naive. They did not see the storm gathering quietly behind my eyes. Claire became my guide. She had survived years of betrayal, manipulation, and violence, and she taught me how to read people. "Watch," she whispered one day as we walked through the yard. "Not everyone who smiles at you is a friend. Not everyone who glares is your enemy. Power is hidden in patience." I watched. I listened. I learned which prisoners controlled the small economy of favors, who could be bribed, and who would stab you in the back without hesitation. Every whisper carried information. Every gesture, a hidden message. I also noticed how prison mirrored the world outside. Alliances formed, strategies were deployed, and every action had consequences. The same ruthlessness that had destroyed my father's empire existed here, just in a smaller, harsher version. Nathan and Marcus never left my mind. I pictured them in our Chicago mansion, moving pieces on the board of our family empire while I rotted behind these walls. I imagined their smiles, the confidence that came from thinking they had destroyed me. But I also imagined the moment they would regret underestimating me. In the evenings, I spent hours alone in the library. I read law books, business journals, and anything that would sharpen my mind. I trained my memory to recall details, patterns, and weaknesses. If I was to reclaim my life, I had to be smarter than everyone who had wronged me. Then came the first clue, though I did not recognize it immediately. A new inmate, recently transferred, whispered a story about a business dispute connected to my father. The details were vague, but my pulse quickened. Someone was still moving behind the scenes. Someone was hiding the truth. Could it be Marcus, Nathan? Or someone else entirely? Every interaction became a puzzle, every conversation a test. I learned to hide my emotions, to conceal my thoughts, and to turn suspicion into opportunity. I was no longer the 18-year-old girl who cried over her father's death. I was a student of strategy, a quiet observer, and a storm waiting to break. 10 years passed in a blur of learning, endurance, and silent preparation. I emerged from those prison walls not broken, but sharpened, ready to reclaim what was stolen from me. And the city that had turned against me would soon see that Isabella Hayes was no longer the girl they thought they knew. As I stepped onto the streets of Chicago once more, the city skyline glittered under the sun. mocking and inviting all at once. My eyes scanned the familiar streets, each building, each street corner, each shadow holding secrets and reminders of the past. The gates opened, and the sunlight hit me like 1,000 knives. 10 years. 10 years of darkness, isolation, and silence. I stood for a moment, breathing in the cold Chicago air, and felt a mix of fear, anger, and determination swirl inside me. Everything had changed, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer the girl who had been thrown into prison. I was sharper, smarter, and hungrier than ever. The city skyline rose before me, glittering and indifferent, as if mocking the pain of my past. Every street, every corner, every familiar building whispered memories of my father, my family, and the life that Marcus and Nathan had stolen from me. I could feel the storm inside me building, quiet, patient, ready to strike. I did not return to the Hayes mansion. That place was gone, claimed by Marcus and Nathan long ago. Instead, I rented a modest apartment in the Loop. From here, I could watch, plan, and wait. Every skyscraper, every bustling street, reminded me that they were still out there, thriving in the empire that should have been mine. Marcus had aged, but his charm remained intact, polished and dangerous. I could picture him in his office, making deals, smiling to clients, hiding the ruthlessness that had destroyed my family. Nathan, too, had grown bolder, more arrogant, flaunting the power that was rightfully ours. Did they even know I was back? Did they sense the storm that had been quietly forming while I rotted behind bars? Observation became my first weapon. I attended social events, business gatherings, and private dinners under assumed identities. I watched their habits, listened to their conversations, and studied every subtle gesture. Secrets were everywhere, hidden in the way they laughed, the documents they handled, and the whispered conversations I overheard. The first gala I attended after my release was like stepping into another world. Marcus stood tall, a glass of scotch in his hand, speaking to investors with a practiced smile. Nathan leaned casually against a table, his eyes scanning the crowd as if hunting. They had no idea I was here, invisible yet fully aware of every move. The thought filled me with a cold satisfaction. For 10 years, I had asked myself the same questions. How far would they go to protect their stolen power? Could I dismantle their world piece by piece without them knowing it was me? I had already begun my plan. A small financial discrepancy, a tiny leak in one of Marcus's ventures, could reveal weakness. I had studied the company's structure from afar, piecing together alliances and vulnerabilities. Every step had to be precise. One misstep could undo everything I had endured. As I left the gala that night, the city lights reflecting in the dark waters of the Chicago River, I realized revenge would not come suddenly or violently. It would come through intelligence, patience, and timing. And when it did, it would be unavoidable. 2 questions lingered as I disappeared into the night, hidden yet watchful. Who would fall first, Marcus or Nathan? Could anyone truly hide their sins from someone who had nothing to lose? Returning to Chicago was like stepping into a battlefield disguised as a city. 10 years of planning, waiting, and watching had led me to this moment. Every face I passed on the street, every luxury car parked along Michigan Avenue, every skyscraper gleaming in the sunlight, reminded me that Marcus and Nathan were still thriving in the empire they had stolen from me. I knew I could not strike openly. Revenge would not come from a confrontation or a shouting match. It would come quietly, strategically, like a shadow moving through a crowded room. My first move had to be subtle, calculated, and precise. I started with Marcus. From the shadows, I studied his business dealings, attending meetings under the guise of a consultant interested in investments. I watched how he relied on certain key advisors, the small cracks in his decision-making, and the overconfidence that had been his downfall before. One small error, one hidden weakness, and I would have my opening. Nathan was a different challenge. He was impulsive, quick to anger, and prone to arrogance. But arrogance left traces: digital mistakes, financial oversights, careless words in public. I began mapping his patterns, noting where he made mistakes and how I could exploit them without raising suspicion. The first opportunity came faster than I expected. A minor deal Marcus was pushing to expand. The family business overseas had a flaw and overlooked clause that could result in a massive financial loss if manipulated correctly. I quietly reached out to an old ally, someone who had connections in Marcus's company, and set the plan in motion. Each move was like a chess piece sliding across a board. I had to anticipate every reaction, every counter move, and every lie Marcus and Nathan would tell themselves to feel safe. Patience was my weapon, and deception my shield. But even as I focused on strategy, the memories of my father haunted me. His laughter in the Hayes mansion, the way he walked through the halls with pride, and the cold betrayal of Marcus and Nathan. Each memory was fuel for my patience, a reminder of why I could not fail. That night, as I watched the city from my apartment window, the Chicago River reflecting the lights like molten silver, I felt the first stirrings of satisfaction. My plan was set into motion. The first domino was about to fall, though neither Marcus nor Nathan suspected it. The thrill of the first move was intoxicating, but I knew I could not celebrate. In the world Marcus and Nathan had built, even the smallest error could alert them. I watched from my apartment, hidden in plain sight. As the ripple of my actions began to spread, Marcus's phone buzzed repeatedly during a high-profile meeting. I knew he would try to mask his panic, but I had seen it before. Micro-expressions, the subtle shift in posture, the way his hands trembled ever so slightly as he reached for his glass. That flaw in the overseas deal, my carefully placed nudge through an anonymous consultant, had forced him to make a hasty decision. Nathan, ever the impulsive one, noticed before Marcus did. He called Marcus into his office, pacing like a predator sensing weakness. Their voices were calm on the surface, but I could imagine the tension beneath. I had planted seeds of doubt, small discrepancies in contracts and emails, and now they were beginning to consume their trust in each other. I allowed myself a quiet smile. The first cracks were appearing in the empire that had stolen everything from me. Marcus and Nathan were unaware that the girl they had once dismissed as naive and weak had returned. And unlike 10 years ago, I had no fear, no hesitation, only purpose. Every night, I reviewed their movements. Every document, every conversation, every glance exchanged at the office was now a puzzle I could piece together. I began noticing the alliances. Marcus had formed alliances that were strong in appearance but weak at their core. I made mental notes of who could be swayed, who could be pressured, and who might betray them for the right incentive. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that my revenge was not only about Marcus and Nathan. It was about reclaiming the life stolen from me, proving to myself that the girl who cried over her father's death was gone. What remained was sharper, stronger, and far more dangerous. One evening, as I walked along the Chicago River, the city lights mirrored in the water, I realized something critical. Marcus and Nathan's arrogance was not their only weakness. Their overconfidence in their control, their belief that no one could touch them, was a vulnerability I could exploit at every turn. The city had not forgotten me, and neither had the empire that had stolen my life. But this time, I was not the powerless girl they once knew. Every move I made now was deliberate, precise, and designed to unnerve. Marcus and Nathan had begun to notice small disruptions in their operations, though they still did not suspect me. That ignorance was my greatest weapon. I decided it was time to step closer, to place subtle challenges in their world that would make them question everything. My first target was Marcus's public image. A minor scandal, carefully seated among the elite social circles, began circulating. Nothing that could destroy him outright, but enough to make him nervous, to make him second-guess his decisions. I watched from a distance, savoring the tension in his eyes when he heard whispers of the rumors. Nathan, on the other hand, was less cautious. I planted doubts in his trusted allies. questioning the loyalty of those closest to him. I did not need to confront him directly. All I had to do was create uncertainty. One wrong glance, one hesitation in judgment, and the carefully built facade of invincibility would start to crumble. Every evening, I reviewed the day's results, noting small victories and planning the next steps. It was a delicate dance too much too soon, and they would recognize the pattern. Patience was key. Watching their reactions, anticipating their moves, and remaining invisible gave me a sense of control I had never known in those 10 years behind bars. But it was not only the business world that requires strategy. Personal connections also held power. Family friends, distant acquaintances, and old colleagues could be persuaded to aid in subtle sabotage. I reached out quietly, planting myself in their awareness without revealing my identity. Every piece of information, every small favor, became a weapon. One night, while attending a charity gala under a different name, I observed both Marcus and Nathan in the same room. The tension between them was almost palpable, though they did not yet know the cause. Small gestures, nervous glances, whispered conversations, they were beginning to crack under the weight of uncertainty. And I had not even revealed my hand yet. The thrill of watching Marcus and Nathan stumble through uncertainty was intoxicating. But I knew observation alone would not be enough. It was time to take the next step, the first direct trap. I spent days planning, studying their routines, their schedules, and the people who had the most influence over them. Every detail mattered. A slight misstep could alert them to my presence, and after 10 years, I was not willing to risk it. Precision was everything. The opportunity came during a private business meeting at Marcus's downtown office. He was about to finalize a major international deal, one that would secure him more power and wealth. I planted evidence of a critical financial discrepancy, carefully ensuring it appeared to come from someone within his inner circle. One email, one forged report, and the dominoes would begin to fall. I watched from a nearby cafe, my eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. The moment Marcus read the report, I saw it. His composure faltered for a fraction of a second. The overconfidence I remembered from my childhood was gone, replaced by uncertainty. He excused himself abruptly, leaving Nathan to face their clients alone. Nathan's reaction was even more telling. He questioned everyone in his office, pacing and snapping at his assistants. His arrogance could not protect him from the creeping doubt that I had planted. Every small question, every hesitation, every glance of suspicion was exactly what I had wanted. The first trap had worked. Even as satisfaction surged through me, I reminded myself to remain patient. This was only the beginning. One misstep, one reveal too early, and Marcus and Nathan could unite against me. I had to let the cracks grow slowly, letting paranoia fester, letting their arrogance blind them to the real threat. That night, as I walked along the Chicago River, the city lights reflecting in the water, I felt a quiet thrill. My plan was unfolding exactly as I had imagined. And while they were still unaware of my presence, the fear I had planted was beginning to take root. Two questions lingered, sharper than ever. How long could Marcus maintain control while suspicion grew around him? Would Nathan realize too late that the storm he ignored had been waiting for a decade? The first trap had been set, and the game was no longer just about observation, it was about domination. The morning after the trap, the city felt different. Not the city itself, but the air around Marcus and Nathan. Their empire, polished and untouchable for years, had developed the first cracks. I could see it from a distance, in the subtle signs of panic and hesitation that now marked their every move. Marcus arrived at his office later than usual, clearly rattled. His normally commanding presence was diminished, replaced by a quiet, almost desperate intensity. I watched him from a nearby rooftop cafe, the city skyline framing him like a character in a tragic play. Every glance at his assistants, every hesitant word, every tight-lipped conversation screamed that something had gone wrong. Nathan was worse. The impulsive, arrogant man I remembered had begun to crumble under the weight of suspicion. He interrogated his team repeatedly, questioned deals that had never failed before, and even double-checked Marcus's work. It was deliciously ironic, the brothers, once united in betrayal, now at odds because of a single, carefully placed disruption. The ripple effect spread beyond just Marcus and Nathan. Their investors began noticing inconsistencies, and whispers in boardrooms suggested possible internal corruption. And all the while, I remained invisible, watching them drown in doubt. The storm had begun and it was unstoppable. Yet, even as I relished their panic, I reminded myself that patience was key. The empire was vast, and every move had to be calculated. Too much too soon, and Marcus and Nathan might unite against me, or worse, discover the person behind the chaos. I had to remain a shadow, silent and unseen, allowing their paranoia to consume them from within. One night, as I reviewed their movements, I realized the beauty of the plan. Each small act of sabotage, each carefully timed disruption, was like knocking over dominoes. One misstep after another, and the entire empire would collapse without me ever touching it directly. From the safety of my apartment, I whispered to the city lights, to the empty streets, and to the ghosts of my past. This was only the beginning. The revenge I had dreamed of for 10 long years was finally unfolding. Watching Marcus and Nathan crumble from a distance was satisfying, but I knew that true victory required more than just financial sabotage. To dismantle an empire, I needed to strike at what they valued most: their personal lives, their relationships, and the pride that blinded them. Marcus had always been obsessed with appearances. His carefully curated image as a tycoon and a family man was his armor. I began to exploit it subtly. A carefully timed leak to the press suggested mismanagement within his social projects, making his friends and investors doubt his judgment. Nothing direct, nothing traceable, just enough to create cracks in the trust he relied upon. I watched as doubt grew in his eyes, as subtle panic crept into the conversations he had with his inner circle. Nathan was impulsive and driven by emotion. I found his weakness in his relationships. A casual mention, a manipulated misunderstanding, and he began to suspect betrayal where none existed. His paranoia became almost tangible, visible in the way he paced, the way he questioned loyal assistants, the way he glared at Marcus for no reason. I could see the tension between them growing by the hour. I took care to remain invisible, appearing in no photos, leaving no trail. Every email I sent, every rumor I planted, was calculated to create maximum disruption while keeping myself safely in the shadows. 10 years in prison had taught me patience, and patience was now my greatest weapon. As I observed from a rooftop overlooking the city, the Chicago skyline glittering like a battlefield at night, I realized something important. Revenge was not just about anger. It was about strategy, timing, and precision. The thrill of knowing they were faltering without realizing why was intoxicating. I reminded myself that this was only the beginning. The real confrontation, the personal reckoning, would come later. For now, their fear, their suspicion, and their faltering pride were my allies. Every small disruption brought me closer to reclaiming what was taken from me. The storm had reached the heart of the empire, and the first tremors of collapse were visible. Soon the empire that had stolen my father from me would crumble entirely. It was time to tighten the trap and force mistakes that would leave them exposed, both publicly and privately. I spent days observing, tracking every meeting, every deal, every personal interaction. I learned the patterns of their lives, the predictable arrogance that had once blinded them. And now I would use those patterns against them. The opportunity came at a high-profile charity gala in downtown Chicago. Both Marcus and Nathan were scheduled to attend, surrounded by investors, journalists, and social elites. It was the perfect stage. I planted an anonymous tip suggesting mismanagement in one of Marcus's charitable foundations. A seemingly small detail, easily overlooked by anyone but carefully designed to trigger suspicion. Among the gala's influential guests, Nathan, too, became a target. I had orchestrated a rumor about a betrayal in his personal circle, an assistant who had been loyal for years. The subtle suggestion of disloyalty would push him into overreaction, and I knew he could not resist acting impulsively in public. As the gala began, I observed from the shadows, my heart steady and my mind sharp. Marcus's smile faltered when whispers reached him. His perfectly practiced charm wavered as questions were directed his way. Nathan's impulsive nature took hold, and he snapped at his assistant during a live moment, raising eyebrows and spreading tension across the room. Every small reaction was exactly what I had anticipated. From the rooftop above, I watched them crumble, their poise shattering in real time. The empire that had seemed untouchable was now showing its vulnerability to everyone who mattered. And they did not yet know it was me behind it. But the most satisfying part was not just the public humiliation. It was the fear that was now consuming them. Fear of mistakes, fear of betrayal, fear of the unknown. Every whisper, every glance, every doubt I had planted was becoming a weapon. 2 questions echoed in my mind as the gala unfolded. How long would Marcus maintain his public image before the cracks became undeniable? Could Nathan survive the unraveling of his personal trust while still believing he was in control? The trap had tightened, and there was no escape. The storm I had carried for 10 years was finally here. The empire was no longer whole. Marcus and Nathan were faltering, their confidence cracked, their trust in each other strained. But observation alone was no longer enough. I needed to turn them against each other. To make the fractures personal and irreversible, I began by sending carefully crafted, anonymous tips and subtle manipulations to both of them. Marcus received hints of Nathan's secret deals with rival investors. Nathan, in turn, got suggestions that Marcus had been undermining his personal ventures. Both tips were false, but planted expertly to exploit their worst tendencies. Marcus's suspicion and Nathan's impulsive paranoia. I watched from a safe distance as the seeds took root. Marcus began questioning Nathan's loyalty during private meetings. Nathan responded with defensiveness and hostility. Friends and allies who once supported both brothers now sensed tension, unsure who was truly in charge. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every private email became a battleground. The most thrilling part was how subtle it all was. No one suspected me. The brothers were destroying themselves without knowing the cause. Watching them fight for control, for recognition, for loyalty that no longer existed, gave me a sense of power I had been denied for 10 long years. One afternoon, I followed Marcus to his office, unseen. He was alone, staring at spreadsheets, muttering accusations at himself and Nathan. The empire's foundations were crumbling from the inside, faster than I had even predicted. Nathan, on the other hand, lashed out publicly during a minor board meeting, humiliating himself and raising serious doubts among investors. I smiled quietly to myself. This was the work of patience and precision. 10 years in prison had taught me restraint, but also the beauty of timing. Every small disruption, every whispered doubt, every carefully placed lie was moving me closer to the final reckoning. The fractures were no longer hidden. They were spreading, unstoppable, and I was the invisible hand guiding their downfall. The cracks had widened. Marcus and Nathan were no longer the untouchable tycoons they had once seemed. Their empire, built on arrogance and secrecy, was now vulnerable, and I could feel the moment to strike approaching. Patience had carried me this far, but action was now necessary. I began infiltrating their business operations in subtle, almost invisible ways. Anonymous tips to key investors, small manipulations of contracts, and careful redirection of resources created chaos behind the scenes. Their employees began making mistakes under pressure, and the brothers grew increasingly desperate to maintain control. Marcus was the first to show real signs of panic. He overanalyzed every deal, hesitated in negotiations, and began second-guessing his decisions. Nathan, impulsive as ever, lashed out at anyone who questioned him, alienating loyal staff. The internal struggle was delicious to watch, each move orchestrated with precision, but the most satisfying part was the way the fractures affected their personal lives. Social appearances became strained, arguments leaked into public events, and the people who once admired them now whispered doubts behind closed doors. I stayed in the shadows, watching, waiting, and knowing that the empire's collapse was no longer a distant threat, it was imminent. Late one evening, I entered a quiet cafe near the Chicago River, reviewing every detail of my plan. The city lights reflected in the water, mirroring the tension and anticipation I felt. Every small disruption, every manipulated whisper, every shadow of doubt had been carefully placed. The empire was crumbling, and Marcus and Nathan were too blinded by suspicion and ego to see it coming. The stage was set. The players were falling into place. And I, invisible yet unstoppable, was ready to claim the final act. The city buzzed below, unaware of the storm I had unleashed from the shadows. Marcus and Nathan were no longer merely faltering. Behind closed doors, they were about to face the first cracks of public exposure. After 10 years of planning, patience had given me the perfect opportunity to strike openly, without revealing myself. I had carefully gathered evidence of financial discrepancies, minor betrayals, and personal failures within their empire. Nothing illegal that could trace back to me, but enough to make whispers turn into questions, questions into rumors, and rumors into doubt. The perfect chain reaction. The gala fundraiser for the Hayes Foundation was the ideal stage. Marcus and Nathan arrived, their suits sharp, smiles perfected, and pride intact. But the whispers I had planted had already spread among the city's elite. Journalists, investors, and donors exchanged subtle glances, quiet questions, and small smirks that did not escape my notice. Marcus sensed it immediately. He scanned the room, tension written on his face. Nathan, impulsive as always, snapped at a donor over a trivial issue, unaware that his reaction was being recorded. Every misstep, every tiny falter, every flicker of doubt was magnified under the bright lights of Chicago's social elite. From my hidden vantage point, I felt a surge of satisfaction. The empire that had stolen my father, destroyed my family, and sent me to prison was unraveling in real time. And Marcus and Nathan were powerless to stop it. Their public image, carefully crafted over decades, was now cracking in front of everyone who mattered. Yet even in this chaos, I remained invisible. The true power of revenge lies in being unseen, untouchable, and precise. By the time they realized who had orchestrated their downfall, it would be too late. The empire was teetering. Every carefully laid plan, every whispered doubt, every manipulated misstep was pushing Marcus and Nathan closer to complete collapse. From the safety of my apartment, I could watch it all unfold like a slow-motion storm, thrilling in the inevitability of their downfall. Marcus was barely holding it together. Meetings that once ran smoothly now ended in confusion and frustration. His confident tone had been replaced by hesitation, his authoritative presence reduced to uncertainty. Nathan, on the other hand, was unraveling faster than I anticipated. Impulsive reactions, sudden anger, and constant suspicion had isolated him from his allies. Friends and colleagues now questioned his judgment, and every misstep was magnified in the eyes of the public. I knew that the final phase required patience. One wrong move, and the brothers might unite or suspect the invisible force, orchestrating their demise. So I observed, planned, and waited. The perfect moment arrived during a high-profile board meeting at the top of their skyscraper in downtown Chicago. Investors, partners, and journalists had been subtly tipped to expect tensions, and they were not disappointed. Marcus arrived first, stiff and guarded. Nathan stormed in moments later, already irritated, sensing betrayal in every glance. Within minutes, the carefully orchestrated, whispers and doubts erupted into a full-blown confrontation. From my hidden vantage point, I watched the spectacle. Accusations flying, tempers flaring, and alliances crumbling in real time. The empire, once untouchable, now teetered on the edge of collapse. And neither Marcus nor Nathan had any idea who had orchestrated it. Even as I smiled at their faltering pride, I reminded myself that patience had been my greatest weapon. Every misstep, every crack in their facade, was part of a meticulously planned chain leading to the final reckoning. Two questions now hovered over the skyline like dark clouds. How much longer could Marcus and Nathan maintain control before the empire finally shatters under their own mistakes? Would anyone in the city ever guess the invisible hand behind the empire's collapse? Or would the brothers fall without understanding the cause? The storm was near its peak, and soon, everything they had built would crumble completely. The moment I had waited 10 years for was finally within reach. Marcus and Nathan were exhausted, paranoid, and fractured. Their empire was crumbling, not just in business but in every relationship, every alliance, every carefully guarded secret. Now it was time to take the final moves, calculated, invisible, and devastating. I had prepared meticulously. Every document, every small leak, every planted rumor had been carefully placed to lead them into traps they could not escape. Now it was about precision. One wrong step and the plan would unravel. But I was ready. Patience and planning had sharpened my mind into a weapon more powerful than any physical force. The first target was Marcus. A falsified contract, subtly introduced, caused him to authorize a major investment under the impression it was safe. Within hours, it was exposed as a massive financial blunder. Investors were furious, and the board questioned his competence openly. Marcus's confidence collapsed. His perfectly curated public image was shattered in an instant. Nathan's downfall followed quickly. I had orchestrated a betrayal within his inner circle. A trusted assistant, carefully persuaded, leaked confidential information that exposed Nathan's mismanagement and impulsive decisions. Within the day, he was forced to apologize publicly, humiliated in front of the same social and business elite he had once dominated. From my hidden vantage point, I watched them falter, powerless and exposed. The empire that had destroyed my family, that had sent me to prison for 10 years, was finally collapsing from within. And they had no idea it was me who had orchestrated every move. Even as I savored the moment, I remained cautious. Revenge required control until the very end. One final step remained: reclaiming my father's legacy and reminding the city who had truly paid the price for their arrogance. The pieces were in place. The empire was on the brink, and the final act of justice was ready to unfold. The empire that had once belonged to my father, Gregor Hayes, was within my reach. 10 years of imprisonment, 10 years of planning, and 10 years of watching in silence had led to this exact moment. Every move I had made, every whisper, every manipulated misstep, had been building toward this final reclamation. I stepped into the Grand Hayes Tower, the city skyline reflecting in the glass as I walked through the doors. Memories of my father's office flooded me, the polished mahogany desk, the shelves lined with awards, the city map he had studied with such precision. I felt a mixture of nostalgia, anger, and determination. This was more than a business. It was a legacy stolen from me and my family, and I was here to take it back. Marcus and Nathan had already been weakened publicly and privately. The board had begun questioning every decision, and investors were hesitant, unsure who could be trusted. I moved quietly but confidently, meeting with key allies who had once doubted me. Their loyalty was earned through careful planning and subtle persuasion. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of my father's life and mine. The most satisfying moment came when the final signatures were placed, transferring control back to me, the rightful heir. The brothers could only watch from a distance as their power evaporated, realizing too late that they had been outmaneuvered entirely. Even as I regained control, I felt the weight of the past 10 years. My father's murder, my unjust imprisonment, the betrayal of my own family, it all fueled the fire that had brought me here. The empire was mine, but the lessons were far greater. Patience, strategy, and resilience could overcome even the deepest betrayal. The throne was mine, the empire restored, and the ghosts of the past finally laid to rest. After reclaiming the empire, there was still one final confrontation I could not avoid. My uncle, the man whose greed had killed my father, and my cousin, the accomplice who had followed blindly, remained free but no longer untouchable. The time had come to face them, not with violence, but with the power of truth and exposure. I invited them both to the Hayes Tower under the pretense of reconciliation. Their faces showed a mixture of arrogance and surprise when they saw me enter. 10 years had passed, but my resolve had only grown stronger. I could feel the tension in the room, a fragile thread ready to snap. "You thought you could steal everything from me," I said calmly, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. "You thought my father's legacy was gone forever." My uncle's expression shifted from smugness to unease. My cousin tried to mask fear with a nervous laugh, but it faltered under my gaze. I had collected every piece of evidence, documents, emails, recordings, proof of their betrayal and murder. The law had been powerless then, but now, in the court of exposure and public scrutiny, they were vulnerable. As I presented each piece of evidence, I watched their world unravel. Their carefully maintained facade of innocence cracked under the truth. The empire they thought they could control now stood against them. And in that moment, I felt a justice far more satisfying than vengeance through anger and intelligent, calculated reckoning. I did not raise my hand. I did not shout. I simply let the truth speak, and the consequences fell naturally. My uncle's empire connections began to sever, and my cousin faced immediate scrutiny from the very networks they once controlled. The balance had shifted entirely. The shadows of my past were finally confronted, and for the first time in a decade, I felt a calm certainty. The people who had destroyed my family were exposed, powerless, and accountable. The city skyline glowed under the evening lights as I stood on the balcony of Hayes Tower, looking over the empire my father had built and I had reclaimed. 10 years of pain, betrayal, and imprisonment had led to this moment. The weight of the past decade was heavy, but a sense of calm and triumph settled over me. Marcus, Nathan, my uncle, and my cousin, all those who had destroyed my family, were powerless now. Their names whispered in the same elite circles that had once elevated them, but now with doubt, disgrace, and shame attached. I had not sought revenge through violence but through patience, intelligence, and strategy. Their downfall had been complete, just, and inevitable. I thought of my father, Gregor Hayes, and the life he had dreamed of leaving me. Justice was more than punishment. It was reclaiming what was stolen, restoring honor, and proving that truth and resilience could overcome even the darkest betrayal. The empire was mine, but more importantly, I had proven to myself that no injustice could define me forever. As I walked through the halls of the tower, memories of my years in prison came rushing back, the loneliness, the anger, the longing. But they no longer held power over me. Every setback, every injustice had been transformed into strength. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was the architect of my own destiny, and yet, even in victory, questions lingered, because justice and morality are never simple. Was my revenge right? Or did I cross a line by orchestrating their complete downfall? When all is said and done, can the pain of betrayal ever truly be erased? Or does it simply transform into wisdom and strength? I smiled faintly, looking at the city below. The world continued, bustling and unaware, but I knew the truth. I had reclaimed my life, honored my father, and restored justice in the way only patience and strategy could achieve. The storm of the past 10 years had passed, leaving me standing, victorious and free. The empire was restored, the betrayers exposed, and I finally felt the quiet satisfaction of closure. I stood on the balcony of Hayes Tower, the city lights reflecting the life I had rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. 10 years of pain, imprisonment, and deceit had led to this moment. The empire was mine. The people who had destroyed my family were exposed, powerless, and humiliated. Yet, victory was not simply revenge, it was justice. Patience, strategy, and resilience had won where anger could not. I had reclaimed my father's legacy, but more importantly, I had reclaimed myself. The storm had passed. The empire was restored. And I, Isabella Hayes, finally felt free.